My name is Johnathan Levy, and I serve as chair of the Dyspraxia Foundation. First and foremost, I have dyspraxia myself. I'm chair of the Dyspraxia Foundation, which is the UK's only charity dedicated to supporting people affected by dyspraxia. Professionally, I'm a charity professional. I work in fundraising. I've engaged in all kinds of charities over the years. But definitely, Dyspraxia Foundation has ended up being a charity which I've become chair of. It's first chair in its history to have dyspraxia, and absolutely it means a lot to me, the cause, because dyspraxia is a lifelong condition, and opportunities like this are certainly appreciated in terms of raising awareness of what we do and championing the cause.
Johnathan Levy is the chairman of the Dyspraxia Foundation. Dyspraxia Foundation is the first charity of its kind to devote its efforts towards offering support to those people living with dyspraxia. In addition to this, Johnathan Levy is the first person to chair the Dyspraxia Foundation living with dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is a chronic condition and a developmental coordination disorder, and it's a spectrum, which means that it can affect each person in different ways. Each person's experience of living with dyspraxia can be a unique experience to each particular individual.
So the organisation, Dyspraxia Foundation, has been going for 35 years. So that's actually longer than I've been alive. So I didn't found it myself. I've been chair of the charity for about 15 months. I've been a board member trustee for several years prior to that. But the organisation's been going for 35 years, and it was set up by a couple of parents whose children had dyspraxia themselves.
Although Johnathan Levy has only been chairman for a short span of time, during the charity organisation's history, Dyspraxia Week is something that is commemorated for the majority of that span, since it's so highly significant to many people affected by dyspraxia, and it means so much to many people who have dyspraxia to have such a week dedicated to people living with dyspraxia. Dyspraxia Week is celebrated to increase levels of awareness of the lifelong condition for the people, to talk about their unique experiences of dyspraxia, and to propagate the message of dyspraxia to award it more recognition among the wider community. According to online information sources, in 1937, Dr. Samuel Orton declared dyspraxia to be one of the 6 most common developmental disorders.
So Dyspraxia Week, in answer to your question, I'm going to guess that Dyspraxia Week has been going for the majority of our 35-year history. I can't actually prove that, but I guess it's been going for many years anyway. And lots of charities nowadays have awareness days or awareness weeks or even awareness months in some cases, basically. And that's the key word, I guess, awareness, really. So Dyspraxia Week is annual, as you know, taking place in October every year. And I guess the power of it being annual is, it can be in people's diaries or calendars, if you like. And it means we can plan for it better. We can, be more consistent in people knowing it exists. And although it's called Dyspraxia Week, we used to just call it Dyspraxia Awareness Week, its core purpose still ultimately is around awareness. Because still, although awareness of dyspraxia is getting better, it's still not anywhere near as well known as other conditions like autism, dyslexia, even ADHD is currently growing massively in its awareness too. And dyspraxia relates to these conditions. And all these conditions, they have our own kind of awareness days, awareness weeks as well. But dyspraxia is actually, although it's more poorly understood, dyspraxia is actually more common officially than autism. We say about 5 to 6% of the UK population has dyspraxia. And that means in a classroom, say, of 30 children, it's likely at least one of them has dyspraxia, even if they're not diagnosed. It's a lifelong condition. So Dyspraxia Week is ultimately about awareness, campaigning, and as part of the campaigning, kind of, lobbying to some extent for, improved outcomes and greater awareness and understanding of how people are affected.
One of the objectives of Dyspraxia Week is the celebration of being unique and being distinctly different from other disorders, as it is neurodiverse and a spectrum condition, and so every person's dyspraxia can result in all people being affected differently. Dyspraxia Week celebrates those differences which are unique to dyspraxia in comparison to other spectrum disorders.
This sounds almost quite bad in today's society, but before, so when we were first founded, say in the 80s, some even medical professionals, called dyspraxia clumsy child syndrome, which sounds terrible, really, and it's not just about clumsiness, but over years, clumsiness, lack of coordination, to put it more nicely, perhaps, has been known as a kind of a well-known trait of the condition. But really, dyspraxia is like a spectrum, like lots of neurodiverse conditions. It's a spectrum, and you might meet me, say, with dyspraxia. I am one person to have dyspraxia. You can meet a second person with dyspraxia who could be affected completely differently. But typically, dyspraxia affects fine and gross motor skills, so things like coordination, balance, sometimes speech, organization, processing of thought. An example of that is, I know where I live. I'm speaking to you from where I live right now, obviously. But if you asked me to give directions there, I would really struggle to do it, even though I've lived here like 4 years. It's like too many cross wires in the brain. In my first job, I used to work for a member of parliament, parliamentary role, and I could do the job, I could do a parliamentary work. But as part of my job was, say, writing lots of letters and printing letters and all that to constituents. And an example of how dyspraxia affected me, when it came, I could write the parliamentary letters. When it came to trying to use a printer to print it, this printer would get jammed regularly, like printers do sometimes. It would show a message, it would show a diagram of how to fix the jam. This made no sense to me whatsoever. Likewise, today, I've got my own business, I'm chairing a charity. I still struggle to tie shoelaces, for example. My difficulties nowadays tend to be more kind of, I live independent, I live perfectly fine. But things which lots of people might take for granted, like cooking, cleaning, sometimes with so-called simplest things, can be the most challenging in that respect. But, dyspraxia is a spectrum, as I mentioned. It can affect people really differently. But yeah, typically it's about organization, thought processing, speech, and coordination.
Speaking about the signs and symptoms of dyspraxia, Johnathan identified the core symptoms as being lack of coordination. Dyspraxia can affect motor skills, defined as the ability to innovate movements, and speech and language skills were also among the typical traits of a person with dyspraxia. On analysis, it can take people longer to carry out certain tasks which may appear to be simple to someone who is not suffering from dyspraxia, but it takes people with dyspraxia longer to perform and to learn how to perform those everyday tasks. One of the many objectives of Dyspraxia Week is to raise further awareness of the condition and how it's affecting people's daily lives, because it's typically a condition which can affect people differently. Speaking out about their own experiences of how dyspraxia affects them on a personal level. Dyspraxia Foundation, is part of their Dyspraxia Week, was holding meetings about what can be done to combat isolation so that loneliness can be restricted to some extent, and to entice people to spending more time in developing their social networks, which will allow them to connect with more people and openly speak to other people affected by dyspraxia, and that way they can spread the message of dyspraxia to people on a wider scale. People living with dyspraxia are typically people who do find it challenging to socialize with others and to speak about how their dyspraxia affects themselves. At the end of each year, Dyspraxia Foundation converges on a theme for the entire year. They decide with members of the board and negotiate what the theme is going to be for the year ahead. This year's theme was isolation, for people who experience dyspraxia and how to deal with their isolation, how to develop strategies to get into more social oriented environments, to encourage people to talk about dyspraxia and how they are managing to cope with their own symptoms. Can you speak about the participation of Dyspraxia Week? Who participates in this awareness week?
So Dyspraxia Foundation, firstly, is a membership charity, and Dyspraxia Week, is open to anyone. Lots of our events. So our events are typical. Most of them, at least, are broadcast online, like on social media, like Facebook, for example. So people can tune into them. But we are a membership charity too. So ultimately, we, like most membership charities, members are like our most important people to some extent, at least. So we want to provide our members with resources, with information sheets. So this year's theme, for example, focused on connection. So we ran a series of online events on employment, sensory challenges to social interactions, because lots of people with dyspraxia find social skills, socializing difficult, looking at ways to make connections, reducing loneliness, that kind of thing, expressing yourself, looking at verbal dyspraxia and speech and language difficulties, managing your feelings when feeling overwhelmed, and also on well-being and combating isolation. So people participated by tuning into those events, by downloading information sheets, some of which we've launched this last week. As part of Dyspraxia Week, we had a press release which went out, because we did a survey. Every year we do a survey as part of Dyspraxia Week. We survey our members. This year, related to a theme I just mentioned, was about loneliness, isolation. Well, that wasn't going to be original theme. The original theme was going to be more broad, about connections, well-being, quite a general sort of thing. But our survey found that people with dyspraxia, out of those who participated, a large number, are 4 times more likely to experience loneliness and isolation compared to, say, their non-dyspraxic peers. But it's not just people with dyspraxia who can be affected. It can also be parents and carers of people with dyspraxia, because they might feel like events aren't necessarily catered for them. They might feel, like they are judged negatively, judged differently. So our survey also has revealed that parents and carers of people with dyspraxia also are experiencing loneliness and isolation more so than, say, their typical peers. So people can get involved have got involved through tuning into our events, our information sheets, letting us know what they think, participating in our survey, sharing our news release, and fundamentally, I suppose, also, just spreading a word, letting people know even what dyspraxia is. Because as I mentioned, still today, lots of people don't really understand what dyspraxia is.
As Johnathan highlighted, Dyspraxia Week is open to participation for everyone. Dyspraxia Foundation events are broadcast on their social media platforms such as Facebook. Dyspraxia Foundation is essentially a membership charity. They held online events for their themes on connections and isolation affecting people who are dealing with symptoms of dyspraxia to educate about how to fight isolation issues and reduce loneliness, to create a safe space to hold more social interactions for people with dyspraxia. The Dyspraxia Foundation has conducted a survey asking their members about how isolation affects them on a personal basis, and what they discovered was that people with dyspraxia are 4 times more likely to suffer from isolation than people who don't have dyspraxia. This condition can also encompass adults who are parents and carers. They can also be susceptible to dyspraxia as their peers who already have the condition. Parents may feel that the events are not tailored for them to provide what they're looking for, and may feel like they have been misjudged by others and find they are not being treated as they would prefer. What's the experience, atmosphere attached around Dyspraxia Week?
So I would say Dyspraxia Week for lots of people is a big thing in that, it's a week which is solely dedicated to promoting dyspraxia. Obviously, we Dyspraxia Foundation are running it, but nevertheless, it's gotten more of a news angle to it because in charity sector, like any condition nowadays, there's so many conditions, so many charities, and we're all trying to compete ultimately for awareness, all trying to compete, for news coverage, promotion, that kind of thing. But Dyspraxia Week, is our thing, and like the news release I mentioned a moment ago, obviously it's got a news angle. But it's not just, it's Dyspraxia Week, take a look at us. Like I mentioned a moment ago, as part of our preparation for this year's Dyspraxia Week, we did a survey which revealed, quite a startling figure I mentioned a moment ago. People with dyspraxia are 4 times more likely to experience loneliness and isolation compared to non-dyspraxic peers. That's quite alarming, quite a tragic, statistic, really. And understandably, we've got some news coverage from that as we'd expect. So I'd say, answering your question, Dyspraxia Week is an important way to raise awareness in perhaps a more, let's say, strategic and coordinated manner. We can raise awareness, anyone can raise awareness of anything all year long, really. But, Dyspraxia Week is a coordinated and strategically planned kind of thing. So it certainly takes a lot of time to plan. For our staff, we work very hard. We've got 6 staff, small team, we all work very hard in preparing for it, media inquiries, all that kind of stuff. But definitely it's a positive thing to have, and to have thousands of people tuning into our events online and downloading our resources, sharing in press release, all these kinds of things is a good thing for us.
Dyspraxia Week is highly anticipated every year by many people, and it attains the news coverage and receives admirable media attention, so many other charities are competing for awareness of their condition, but dyspraxia has its own personal experience and a uniqueness about the condition, as it happens to be more prevalent than other neurodiverse conditions. The core objective is to promote awareness of the condition and how it can affect people and different experiences of dyspraxia because of it having different dimensions to the condition, and it affects everybody differently. Dyspraxia awareness is improving, but there's still more work to be done, and with a small team of 6 staff, they are working hard to prepare their resources for this week. There is a more strategic approach to this week than other typical charity awareness weeks, and it's more than just promoting awareness of the condition. It focuses firmly on the positive characteristics of dyspraxia and how you can endeavour to improve yourself, but it mainly focuses on the brighter side of the condition to highlight the diversity of the condition that dyspraxia presents in daily life. Johnathan believes that one of the defining characteristics of being dyspraxic is unfortunately the span of time it takes and the length of time it takes to complete everyday tasks and to achieve their personal objectives. However, Johnathan has provided some form of inspiration by indicating that it may take longer to form and achieve their own ambitions in life, but that should never mean that you should give in. You should always encourage yourself to aspire to improve and work on yourself to achieve certain goals. You should never despair that you are unable to achieve life's goals. You should always continue to strive for success despite having slower processing skills than your peers, and self-belief and that motivation will guide you through the most challenging times when you can start to feel that you have no hope.
Then we find that getting a diagnosis the younger you are does not mean it's easy. It's not easy, but can be easier than getting a diagnosis later in life. And frankly, it can also be considerably much cheaper too. The older you get, the harder it can be to get a diagnosis, and that's not unique to dyspraxia. That's the case for other conditions too as well. So, giving an example of my giving my example for say, when I was younger, I was quite fortunate, really, that my differences, if you like, to my peers were noticed from a very young age, probably like the age of 5 or 6. Obviously, that's because I was struggling in numerous ways, but I was noticed, say in school, for example, by my parents too, who are medical professionals themselves. So I had occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, physiotherapy, and these things absolutely helped me. You can never cure dyspraxia, but these things helped me. And lots of people, especially younger in life, with conditions like dyspraxia, where they are diagnosed or they are self-diagnosed, or just meaning they think they've got it, they're not completely sure, can undertake things like physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. Obviously, every case is different, but absolutely you should go to your medical professional, your GP, if you think you've got concerns. and they can hopefully refer you on and hopefully arrange whatever support you might need. But definitely, we Dyspraxia Foundation are regularly asked all kinds of questions about how to get a diagnosis, often from adults too, because the sad reality is in the UK, it can be quite difficult and expensive sometimes to get a diagnosis later in life. And one of the benefits, say for me and many other people, getting diagnosed the younger you are, is you kind of know why you might struggle at certain things more than some people. So you might be different in some ways, and that, I suppose, can have benefits mentally. Because as I mentioned before, unfortunately, there's evidence to suggest if you have a condition like dyspraxia, autism, dyslexia, ADHD, you are more likely to struggle mentally. And unfortunately, part of that, say in younger years, and adulthood sometimes, because life can be cruel, can be name calling, all this kind of stuff. Difference can be a great thing, and we kind of celebrate difference. Dyspraxia Foundation wise, there's lots of benefits to it sometimes. But unfortunately, difference to some people in society is deemed to be like a negative thing, very unfairly. Different, standing out sometimes can be difficult for people. So we know that getting a diagnosis can be a really positive thing, understanding who you are. And so often when people come to our events or even on social media, like we've got various private groups just for our community on social media. And I've noticed over years, a lot of posts, say for example, on Facebook in these private groups, start with, does anyone else? So often people think they're the only one who's going through something. And then what always happens when someone starts a post, does anyone else? You get people replying, yes, I have this. Yes, it affects me too. So people really then know they're not alone.
Why do you think it's a mental issue barrier that overcomes, like you just said? Why do you think that is, from your own experience as well?
Sure. I'd say people often feel they are the only one. They might receive name calling, unfortunately, just standing out, maybe being a lot slower than their peers. Like myself today, I'm a leader in multiple ways. But in education, my education wasn't terrible. I wasn't really bullied or anything like that. I'm unfortunate in that respect. But I was like last at everything. Whether it's sports day or I was in bottom set for most things. So I was like used to being last, because dyspraxia is like a development delay too. So it doesn't mean, no one's saying you'll never be able to do X, Y, Z. People do say that sometimes, but it's not right. It's a development delay. So chances are it might take you longer to get there, longer perhaps to pass a driving test, or say, to get C, or there's numbers now, isn't it? In GCSEs, when it was my time, grades, pass. It might take you longer, more attempts to get there, but it doesn't mean you can't get there. So I'd say standing out, unfortunately, and feeling like, and sometimes being treated like you're different. You're different and you're less able to your peers. But there can absolutely be positives to having conditions like dyspraxia. So it's not all bad. I don't drive, and I'm not someone who, I'll come into a go-karting in a minute, but I'm not someone who tends to ever put myself down, as such I'm quite confident. But I knew my coordination was so kind of poor, much poorer than my peers in my younger years, even like my late teenage years and all this kind of stuff. I just really, I was pretty certain that if I was to learn to drive, it would be very, very difficult. Now, sometimes people with dyspraxia, they do learn, or some people do learn manual, that's fine. Other people use automatic. They find that's easier for them, they pass that way. But there are lots of people with dyspraxia who don't drive, who might have tried repeatedly, haven't managed to succeed in getting past the test, or again, where I live, I'm fortunate there's good transport links, there's lots of ways around these things. And I sometimes think to myself, I could learn to drive now. I'm 32 now, but actually, there's a saying, something like, what you don't know, you don't miss. And I actually think now, if I was trying to learn to drive now, it would probably just frustrate me more. But I managed perfectly fine not being able to do that. But going back to the go-karting point, I mean, I'm not an expert in go-karting. I'd probably be terrible at go-karting. But in terms of, coordination, like anything in life, really, I think, if you come last at something, the harder you work, um, the more likely you are to progress. And the reality is, you might, or anyone in your situation, you might still come last, but you can still improve your time. You might still become quicker. So lots of life, lots of small steps can make a big difference. And it can be easy to compare yourself to other people. And yeah, it's annoying when people are always beating you. But I feel like the older I've got, the more I've just started to compare myself to myself. When I was younger, even like like 5 years ago, I was like 25, 26, whatever. I wanted to be as good as person this, person that, all kinds of things. And these people are all like non-dyspraxic. But now I'm just kind of at peace with where I am. And as long as I'm continually improving personally, professionally, that's what really matters to me.
With dyspraxia, although you will experience developmental delays in your coordination, you must continuously be working on yourself and trying not to compete with others to achieve what they are able to do. You be the best version of yourself and try to enhance your own skills, because if you continuously work on your own development, you can make progress. Even if it means that you are making little progress, it's still better than last time. Don't be distracted with what others are doing. You should always focus on yourself, and don't be comparing yourself with your peers or those people who don't have your condition. Dyspraxia week is something that is definitely worthwhile to make note of in your diary or on your annual calendar, as this time of year many people who have dyspraxia are really looking forward to celebrating their achievements and what they can do more to improve in terms of social interactions with other people and taking part in physical activities to improve their coordination. This year's theme was based on isolation and how we can work around reducing isolating ourselves from other people's company and getting involved in the social environment more to develop our social interactions with people. Despite their coordination issues they face, they do look forward to Dyspraxia Awareness Week, and it's a time of year that takes a lot of observation and planning prior to Dyspraxia Week. With such a small, confined team, they still manage to pull something together despite the lack of numbers in their team. What are some of the key events leading up to Dyspraxia Week, and is it a highly anticipated event according
Yeah.
to your calendar?
Dyspraxia Week, in terms of the events leading up to it, I mean, it takes lots of planning from us as board members, like myself as chair, but actually most of the operational work is done by our excellent staff team of 6. In charity land, lots of charities have far more staff than 6. So that definitely takes all hands on deck, lots of planning for them. So we agree a theme each year. We decide what kind of when we've agreed on a theme, that then dictates to some extent our survey, what we survey our members on. Then obviously that survey goes out, stays out for like a few weeks. Then it takes time to look into the results of a survey and identify themes. Like I mentioned, this year's theme was around, well, the most staggering thing from the research was around loneliness, isolation. You don't just realize those things with the numbers straight away. You have to work these things out. Then we decide the news angle. We distribute that to the press nationally. We're arranging, again, we mainly our staff, with my support as chair, are arranging our events online, the themes, getting speakers, any event in life, no matter whether it's charity or anything. Events don't just tend to happen overnight, they take planning. It's just mostly people don't see the planning. But yeah, these things take planning, time going into them. And yes, the second part of your question is an anticipated part of Dyspraxia Week, of Dyspraxia Land. Yeah, absolutely. Because as I said before, it's like our week. Anyone can raise awareness about anything really all year long, but Dyspraxia Week is like a planned, coordinated, and more kind of strategic approach.
And I asked Johnathan, how can people acknowledge the condition dyspraxia of other people if they don't have the condition themselves? The advice he gave was to facilitate for other people who experience dyspraxia by making things easier for them, to explain in more simple terms or to elaborate on certain points to help them understand clearly and concisely what's expected from them. Treat each person differently, because we need to be aware of the fact that dyspraxia is a spectrum disorder and the symptoms will present themselves differently to each individual who has dyspraxia. So you need to be aware of the needs of those people and how you are going to meet those needs. You need to ask them how dyspraxia affects them and actively listen to them and pay attention to what they are asking from you. That way they will not feel as though nobody is cooperating. Being cooperative is the key to working with people who have dyspraxia, to make life more convenient for them and work together as a team. Trying to really focus on yourself, trying to be the best version of yourself, is the advice to follow suit for anyone who wants to improve and make substantial progress in achieving their goals. Personal development is an integral part of working on your own skills, trying to enhance your repertoire of skills and developing yourself as the best version of you, and don't make yourself compatible with anyone else. If you work on improving your own skill set, then you can refine yourself to the best of your ability and you can feel more comfortable within yourself without encountering any distractions. Can you tell us how people can acknowledge other people's condition of dyspraxia if they don't have it?
So treat each person differently. So like I said before, I have dyspraxia, you could have dyspraxia, but we could both be affected completely differently. So I would say ask them how it be, if they tell you you've got dyspraxia, be curious about it, ask how it affects them, and actually actively listen to what they're saying. Lots of people in life are a good listener, are actually not. But actually actively listen, take note of what they're saying, and if it's like in a workplace or even in education, based on depending on what they say, see if there's ways that you can potentially help to make things easier for them. Dyspraxia, in simple terms, affects fine and gross motor skills, so physical things, coordination, speech and language, thought processing, organization. Lots of people with dyspraxia, unfortunately, can struggle socially. So, like, going to a party, say lots of people, can perhaps be overwhelming, can be daunting for them. I've mentioned lots of people with dyspraxia might experience a great anxiety than lots of people say who aren't dyspraxia might. But again, it is a spectrum. So when you've met one person with dyspraxia like myself, you've literally met one person with dyspraxia. But yeah, mostly it's around coordination and balance and thought processing. And part of thought processing is say fatigue as well, because so many like cross wires in the brain are part of thought processing. Definitely life has been more tiring, perhaps, for people with dyspraxia.
Dyspraxia is usually a chronic disability which focuses on poor coordination, the ability to innovate movements. It also highlights speech and language difficulties and processing information, and people with dyspraxia usually find socializing difficult when they are in crowds of people, for instance at parties or in gatherings in a social setting.
Like you said with earlier with the grades and numbers, I know now they've changed it from letters to numbers.
Yeah.
And I remember when I did my grade as well, I didn't get the best grades, but I managed to pass it. And like always, I wasn't the brightest student in the class, but I still managed to get through that. So, hearing from your experience, how hard and easy it's for any person that goes through struggle of them not getting the best grades or the low grades, and as long as they pass, either in high school or colleges or in work, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say focus on being the best you can be. And someone who I came into contact with about a decade ago through another business thing I was doing at the time, told me to read, get into personal development. And I was like 22 then, 10 years ago. I didn't really know what that meant. But there's all kinds of back then books, still all kinds of personal development books. But now there's all kinds of podcasts, for example, around personal development. Personal development in simple terms is literally, personally developing yourself, being the best you can be. And leadership is one thing as well. I think leadership is a word, something I'm passionate about, is something people think like you have to have loads of staff to be a leader. Anyone can be a leader in themselves. Things like goal setting, knowing what you want, being really focused. I think focus is really important, being really driven, determined. And as I said before, try, easier said than done, but trying not to compare yourself to your peers, really focusing on being the best you can be. And lots of small steps can make a big difference. So if you're getting, if we talk about go-karting before, if you're getting, I don't know if you're getting a minute faster in go-karting each time, and that's progress. But I would definitely say I would completely endorse personal development. People like, there's all kinds of personal development people who are famous. I would say people like Jay Shetty, other people, Anthony Robbins, all kinds of people I'm really into, and all kinds of quotes, and lots of them can relate to anyone's life. Anyone can aspire to be the best they can be.
And I know we had lockdown and it was quite daunting. And how did that affect your mental health well-being with your
Yeah,
condition?
for me, I found lockdown quite easy. But I think a reason why I found it quite easy is because I had multiple things to be doing. So I wasn't doing any paid work at that time, but I had multiple volunteering roles. I wasn't chairman. I was still a board member of the Dyspraxia Foundation. I was on another board. I still am in fundraising. I was a Samaritan too. I had a voluntary role in prisons too. I couldn't go into prisons at the time, but I had various ways to keep myself occupied. So lockdown for me was quite um, simple to some extent, but I know lots of people did find it difficult, and people in society in general really came to appreciate, the power of interaction and really having people they could communicate with. And of course, I had friends too I could speak to, things like WhatsApp and Zoom, all that kind of stuff. So this has been a significant year in our 35-year history. We've just, in recent months, appointed a new chief executive who's just started in the last 2 weeks. She's called Lucy. She's made a great start to life. We as a board have approved a new business plan for the next 3 years, what we want to achieve. We're about to take on a boardroom apprentice. That's a voluntary role, but it's like someone who's not been on a board before, all this kind of stuff. We're currently about to advertise potentially for a paid apprentice in fundraising too. We want to expand our team. Me as our first chair to have dyspraxia, I'm really committed to us as a charity, amplifying our ambitions, letting people know what we want to do to a greater extent, displaying more ambition than we have done in the past, growing our income. Income is how any charity survives. And as part of that, strengthening our team, all of which will help children, adults, everyone affected by dyspraxia to better reach their full potential at every stage in life, because dyspraxia is lifelong.
Have there been lots of inspirational people who have this condition, or anyone you've come across in your family, or externally with dyspraxia?
So celebrities, famous people who have dyspraxia, they're not involved with Dyspraxia Foundation, or trying to get involved, though it's difficult. Famous people who are known to have dyspraxia. Daniel Radcliffe, who was Harry Potter. Cara Delevingne, who's a model. There's an MP, there's two MPs actually, members of parliament, who've got dyspraxia, Emma Lilbuck and Tom Hunt. Florence Welsh, who is a singer, and well before our time, Albert Einstein apparently had dyspraxia as well. Personally speaking, in my family, I'm the only person I know of who has dyspraxia, but dyspraxia can run in families. So often people in families, more than one person does have it. And in my day-to-day life, I regularly do come across people nowadays who are neurodiverse. Sometimes that includes dyspraxia, but I'm definitely meeting people all the time nowadays who are talking about having ADHD, dyslexia, autism, dyspraxia, because awareness is getting better and people are realizing now it's not as perhaps daunting to speak out as it used to be. So definitely more and more people are becoming open about having a condition. So there can be positive traits, and typically lots of people who have dyspraxia are very empathetic, they are good listeners, driven, perhaps very focused, creative, thinking outside the box. And dyspraxia is a disability, but it's not a disability. No disability is a disability to ambition. So whilst you might struggle with things more in some cases than your non-dyspraxic peers, it's not. It does not mean. It does not at all mean you are any less ambitious or you have any less chance of having a good life for yourself. So definitely lots of good personal qualities: determination, resilience, focus, empathy, listening. There are lots of positive traits, and they are just some of them. So it sounds really cliche, but I would firstly say, do not give up. Dyspraxia is a development delay, not a reason, to accept anything less than your peers. You can absolutely get to where you want to be with great focus and great determination. I would absolutely encourage you to look up Dyspraxia Foundation online. That's dyspraxiafoundation.org.uk. We're on all the usual social media platforms too. And the great thing about getting involved with a charity like ours is you are really not alone. There are so many people who are going through similar things to you, even if they're not openly talking about it. Same with parents and professionals too. We are the UK's only charity dedicated to supporting people affected by dyspraxia. We have lots of resources, community amongst itself, which is great. And we are stronger together.
What can be done to raise more awareness of dyspraxia and how common is the condition?
Yeah. The condition is thought to affect about 5% of the UK population, which is actually more than, say, autism. Even though awareness of autism is currently much greater. So it's more common than people might think. What can be done to raise awareness of dyspraxia? I would say, first of all, sharing stories, letting people know that you have dyspraxia, but talking about it in realistic terms too. So don't be afraid to talk about things you might find difficult. But first of all, I'd say talk about the positives first of all. I would definitely say disclose. If you're in employment or you're about to get a new job, I absolutely would recommend letting your employer know so they understand from the start. But again, speak about it in positive but realistic language, sharing your stories. And anyone you might come across who has dyspraxia, tells you think about dyspraxia, let them know about the Dyspraxia Foundation, and perhaps encourage them to go to to speak to their doctor or whatever. As I said, it's easier the younger you are. But definitely try not to feel like you're alone. You're only going through it yourself, because 5% of the population is thought to have dyspraxia. That's a lot of people, and more people are talking about having dyspraxia, having other relatable conditions too. You see this all the time, even on social media nowadays as well. So definitely check us out, Dyspraxia Foundation online. And be positive, realistic, but be positive about your condition too, because there's lots of positive traits, and employers are increasingly recognizing the benefits of taking on people who are neurodiverse. Yeah, our website is dyspraxiafoundation.org.uk. On Facebook, if you just type in Dyspraxia Foundation, you'll very quickly find us. We've got thousands of followers. On X, I still want to call it Twitter, but on X, our username is spelled Dyspraxia FDTN. But again, just type in Dyspraxia Foundation, you'll find us. Same with Instagram. Because we are the UK's only charity with dyspraxia, we're easy to find on social media.